Hello, everybody. This is Broadzilla's Bedtime Story Corner. As you can see, I'm all in my pajamas. I'm ready for bed, but not without my story. Tonight, we're going to start out, so tonight's picture book is going to be starting out with George and Martha back in town. So it's there. You can see it. It's by James Marshall, and I always really liked these stories because George and Martha are this pair of hippos, a boy hippo and a girl hippo, and they just had the most beautiful platonic friendship. And even though they would get on each other's nerves sometimes, it was always they always came back around to it. It was fine. So we're going to start with George and Martha back in town, and then when I'm finished with this, I'm going to continue with The Magician's Nephew. Alright, let's see here. So, this is 5 stories. 5 stories about 2 dear friends. This is story number 1, called The Box. Martha noticed a little box on George's kitchen table. "Do not open," said the sign. "I won't," said Martha. "I'm not the nosy type." But Martha couldn't take her eyes off the little box. She read the sign again. "Do not open," said the sign. Martha couldn't stand it. "One little peek won't hurt," she said, and she untied the string. Out jumped George's entire collection of Mexican jumping beans. "Oh, my stars," said Martha. It took Martha all afternoon to round up the Mexican jumping beans. One yellow one gave her quite a chase. When George came home, Martha was reading a magazine. "You seem out of breath," said George. "You don't think I opened that little box, do you?" said Martha. "Of course not," said George. "I'm not the nosy type," said Martha. George didn't say a word. These two. All right. Story number 2, The High Board. "Today," said George, "I will jump from the high board." "Don't do it," cried Martha. "Everyone will be watching," said George. "You'll never catch me up there," said Martha. "That's because you're a scaredy cat," said George. But when George got up on the high board, he lost his nerve. "I can't do it," he said, "and everyone's watching." His knees began to shake. "I'll be right up," said Martha. Martha climbed up the ladder. "Now what?" said George. "I'll go first," said Martha, and she jumped off. Martha caused quite a splash. Everyone was impressed. And no one noticed how George got down. "I just didn't feel like it today," said George. Martha didn't say a word. Story number 3, The Trick. George was fond of playing tricks on Martha. But that was not Martha's idea of fun. And when she found her house slippers nailed to the floor, she was not amused. Martha gave George the old silent treatment. "Oh no," said George, "not that." George decided to bake Martha's favorite cake. "This will butter her up," he said. When the cake was done, George put it in a box, and he went to look for a pretty ribbon. "I have a surprise for you," said George. "It's another trick," said Martha. "Not this time," said George. "Then you open it," said Martha. "Very well," said George, "I will." Martha bit her nails while George pulled off the ribbon. Out jumped a rubber tarantula, one stuffed snake, 4 plastic spiders, and 2 real frogs. "Egads!" cried George. "I've been tricked." "And by the way," said Martha, "the cake was simply delicious." Story number 4. The Job. George was excited about his new job. "It's hard work," said Martha. "You must be very strict." "I'll try," said George. Oh, by the way, it doesn't say in the story, but he's a lifeguard. "You must be very strict." "I'll try," said George. "No horsing around is allowed," said Martha. "Thanks for the advice," said George. "That's what friends are for," said Martha. Very soon, George saw that someone was disobeying the rules. "No horsing around," he called through his megaphone. "It's all right," shouted Martha. "It's only me." "You heard me," called out George. George meant business, and he gave Martha quite a bawling out. "Well," said Martha, "and I thought we were friends." "Oh dear," said George. "Martha was right. This is a hard job." You can see she stuffed his megaphone right on his snoot. And story number 5, last story, called The Book. George was all nice and cozy. "May I join you?" said Martha. "I'm reading," said George. "I'll be quiet as a mouse," said Martha. "Thank you," said George, and he went back to his book. But soon Martha was fidgeting. "Please," said George, "have some consideration." "Sorry," said Martha. George went back to his reading, but in no time Martha was fidgeting again. "That does it," said George, and he left. At home he got all nice and cozy again. He opened his book. "It's important to be considerate of our friends," said the book. "It certainly is," said George. "Sometimes we are thoughtless without even knowing it," said the book. "I'll say," said George, "Martha should read this book." He went to find her. "I'm sorry I was fidgeting," said Martha. "I got lonely." "Oh," said George, "I never considered that." "What did you want to tell me?" said Martha. "Oh, nothing," said George. "I just got lonely too." And they sat and told stories into the night. Martha didn't fidget even once. The end. And that was George and Martha Back in Town, one of my favorites when I was a kid. Just the most beautiful platonic friendship between hippos. All right, now next up, if you'll give me just a sec, we're going to continue on with The Magician's Nephew. Bear with me here while I get myself situated. Oop. Bear with me here. All right. So if you'll recall, if you haven't seen my previous videos, Aslan, though he hasn't been named yet, this great lion, just essentially sang Narnia into existence. So Magic Jesus Lion just used the power of rock to bring a magic kingdom into existence. And that is metal AF. Alright. So now there's like a bunch of new animals and stuff in the new world, and things are getting settled. Okay, Chapter 9. The Founding of Narnia. The lion was pacing to and fro about that empty land and singing his new song. It was softer and more lilting than the song which had called up the sun and stars, a gentle rippling music. And as he walked and sang, the valley grew green with grass. It spread out from the lion like a pool. It ran up the sides of the little hills like a wave. In a few minutes it was creeping up the lower slopes from the distant mountains, making that young world every moment softer. The light wind could now be heard ruffling the grass. Soon there were other things besides grass. The higher slopes grew dark with heather. Patches of rough fur, more bristling green, appeared in the valley. Diggory did not know what they were until one began to come up quite close to him. It was a little spiky thing that threw out dozens of arms, and covered these arms with green, and grew larger and larger at the rate of an inch every 2 seconds. There were dozens of these things all around him now. When they were nearly as tall as himself, he saw what they were. "Trees!" he exclaimed. The nuisance of it, as Polly said afterward, was that you weren't left in peace to watch it all. Just as Diggory said "trees," he had to jump because Uncle Andrew had sidled up to him again and was going to pick his pocket. It wouldn't have done Uncle Andrew much good if he'd succeeded, for he was aiming at the right-hand pocket, because he still thought the green rings were homeward rings. But of course Diggory didn't want to lose either. "Stop!" cried the witch. "Stand back! No, further back! If anyone goes within 10 paces of either of the children, I'll knock out his brains." She was poising in her hand the iron bar that she had torn off the lamp-post, ready to throw it. Somehow no one doubted that she would be a very good shot. "So," she said, "you would steal back to your own world with the boy and leave me here." Uncle Andrew's temper at last got the better of his fears. "Yes, ma'am, I would," he said. "Most undoubtedly I would. I should be perfectly in my rights. I have been most shamefully, most abominably treated. I have done my best to show you such civilities as were in my power. And what has been my reward? You have robbed, I must repeat the word, robbed a highly respectable jeweler. You have insisted on my entertaining you to an exceedingly expensive, not to say ostentatious lunch, though I was obliged to pawn off my watch and chain in order to do so. And let me tell you, ma'am, that none of our family have been in the habit of frequenting pawn-shops, except my cousin Edward, and he was in yeomanry. During that indigestible meal, I feel the worst for it every moment. Your behavior and conversation attracted the unfavorable attention of everyone present. I feel I have been publicly disgraced. I shall never be able to show my face in that restaurant again. You have assaulted the police. You have stolen—" "Oh, stow it, governor, do stow it," said the cabby. "Watching and listening's the thing at present, not talking." There was certainly plenty to watch and listen to. The tree which Diggory had noticed was now a full-grown beech whose branches swayed gently above his head. They stood on cool green grass, sprinkled with daisies and buttercups. A little way off, along the river banks, willows were growing. On the other side, tangles of flowering currant, lilac, wild rose, and rhododendron closed them in. The horse was tearing up delicious mouthfuls of new grass. I like the middle lion in the chat there. That's good stuff. All this time the lion's song and his stately prowl, to and fro, backward and forward, was going on. What was rather alarming was that each turn he came a little nearer. Polly was finding the song more and more interesting because she thought she was beginning to see the connection between the music and the things that were happening. When a line of dark firs sprang up on a ridge 100 yards away, she felt they were connected with a series of deep, prolonged notes, which the lion had sung a second before. And when he burst into a rapid series of lighter notes, she was not surprised to see primroses suddenly appearing in every direction. Thus, with an unspeakable thrill, she felt quite certain that all the things were coming, and she said, out of the lion's head. When you listened to his song, you heard the things he was making up, and when you looked around, you saw them. This was so exciting, she had no time to be afraid. But Diggory and the cabby could not help feeling a bit nervous. At each turn of the lion's walk brought him nearer. As for Uncle Andrew, his teeth were chattering, but his knees were shaking so that he could not run away. Suddenly, the witch stepped boldly out toward the lion. It was coming on, always singing, with a slow, heavy pace. It was only 12 yards away. She raised her arm and flung the iron bar straight at its head. Nobody, least of all Jadis, could have missed at that range. The bar struck the lion fair between the eyes. It glanced off and fell with a thud in the grass. The lion came on. Its walk was neither slower nor faster than before. You could not tell whether it even knew that it had been hit. Though its soft paw pads made no noise, you could feel the earth shake beneath their weight. The witch shrieked and ran. In a few moments she was out of sight among the trees. Uncle Andrew turned to do likewise, tripping over a root, and fell flat on his face in a little brook that ran down to join the river. The children could not move. They were not even quite sure they wanted to. The lion paid no attention to them. Its huge red mouth was open, but open in song, not in a snarl. It passed by them so close that they could have touched its mane. They were terribly afraid it would turn and look at them, yet in some queer way they wished it would. But for all the notice it took them, they might just as well have been invisible and unsmellable. When it had passed them and gone a few paces further, it turned, passed them again, and continued its march eastward. Uncle Andrew, coughing and spluttering, picked himself up. "Now, Diggory," he said, "we've got rid of that woman, and the brute of a lion is gone. Give me your hand and put on your ring at once." "Keep off," said Diggory, backing away from him. "Keep clear of him, Polly. Come over here beside me. Now, I warn you, Uncle Andrew, don't come one step nearer. We'll just vanish." "Do what you're told this minute, sir," said Uncle Andrew. "You are an extremely disobedient, ill-behaved little boy." "No fear," said Diggory. "We want to stay and see what happens. I thought you wanted to know about other worlds. Don't you like it now that you're here?" "Like it!" exclaimed Uncle Andrew. "Just look at the state I'm in. And it was my best coat and waistcoat, too." He certainly was a dreadful sight by now, for of course the more dressed up you were to begin with, the worse you look after you'd crawled out of a smashed hansom cab and fallen into a muddy brook. "I'm not saying," he added, "that it's not a most interesting place. If I were a younger man, now perhaps I could get some lively young fellow to come here first, one of those big game hunters. Something might be made of this country. The climate is delightful. I never felt such air. I believe it would have done me good if circumstances had been more favorable. If only we'd had a gun." "Guns be blowed," said the cabby. "I think I'll go see if I can give Strawberry a rub-down. The horse has more sense than some humans, as I could mention." He walked back to Strawberry and began making the hissing noises that grooms make. Do you still think that lion could be killed with a gun?" said Diggory. "He didn't mind the iron bar much." "With all her faults," said Uncle Andrew, "that's a plucky gal, my boy. It was a spirited thing to do." He rubbed his hands and cracked his knuckles, as if he were once more forgetting how the witch frightened him whenever she was really there. "It was a wicked thing to do," said Polly. "What harm had he done her?" "Hullo, what's that?" said Diggory. He had darted forward to examine something only a few yards away. "I say, Polly," he called back, "do come and look." Uncle Andrew came with her, not because he wanted to see, but because he wanted to keep close to the children. There might be a chance of stealing their rings. But when he saw what Diggory was looking at, even he began to take an interest. It was a perfect little model of a lamp-post, about 3 feet high, but lengthening and thickening in proportion as they watched, in fact growing just as the trees had grown. "It's alive, too. I mean, it's lit," said Diggory, and so it was, though of course the brightness of the sun made the little flame in the lantern hard to see unless your shadow fell on it. "Remarkable, most remarkable," muttered Uncle Andrew. "Even I never dreamt of magic like this. We are in a world where everything, even a lamp-post, comes to life and grows. Now I wonder what sort of seed a lamp-post grows from." "Don't you see?" said Diggory. "This is where the bar fell, the bar she tore off the lamp-post at home. It sank into the ground, and now it's coming up as a young lamp-post." But not so very young now. It was as tall as Diggory while he said this. "That's it! Stupendous! Stupendous!" said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands harder than ever. "Ho, ho! They laughed at my magic. That fool of a sister of mine thinks I'm a lunatic. I wonder what they'll say now. I have discovered a world where everything bursts with life and growth. Columbus! Now they talk about Columbus, but what was America to this? The commercial possibilities of this country are unbounded. Bring a few bits of old scrap iron here, bury 'em, and they'll come up as brand new railway engines, battleships, anything you please. They'll cost nothing, and I can sell 'em at full price in England. I shall be a millionaire. And then the climate. I feel years younger already. I can run it as a health resort. A good sanatorium here might be worth $20,000 a year. Of course, I shall have to let a few people into the secret. The first thing is to get that brute shot." "You're just like the witch," said Polly. "All you think of is killing things." And then, as regards to oneself, Uncle Andrew continued in a happy dream, "There's no knowing how long I might live if I settled here, and that's a big consideration when a fellow has turned 60. I shouldn't be surprised if I never grew a day older in this country. Stupendous! The land of youth." "Oh," cried Diggory, "the land of youth! Do you think it really is?" For of course he remembered what Aunt Letty had said to the lady who brought the grapes, and that sweet hope rushed back upon him. "Uncle Andrew," he said, "do you think there's anything here that could cure Mother?" One sec, guys. Okay. "What are you talking about?" said Uncle Andrew. "This isn't a chemist's shop. But as I was saying—" "You don't care twopence about her," said Diggory savagely. "I thought you might. After all, she's your sister as well as my mother. Well, no matter. I'm jolly well going to ask the lion himself if he can help me." And he turned and walked briskly away. Polly waited for a moment and then went after him. "Here, stop, come back. The boy's gone mad," said Uncle Andrew. He followed the children at a cautious distance behind, for he didn't want to get too far away from the green rings, or too near the lion. In a few minutes Diggory came to the edge of the wood, and there he stopped. The lion was singing still, but now the song had once more changed. It was more like what we would call a tune, but it was also far wilder. It made you want to run and jump and climb. It made you want to shout. It made you want to rush at other people and either hug them or fight them. It made Diggory hot and red in the face. It had some effect on Uncle Andrew, for Diggory could hear him saying, "A spirited gal, sir. It's a pity about her temper, but a dem fine woman all the same, a dem fine woman." But what the song did to the two humans was nothing compared to what it did to the country. Can you imagine a stretch of grassy land bubbling like water in a pot? For that was really the best description of what was happening. In all directions it was swelling into humps. There were very different sizes, some no bigger than molehills, some bigger than wheelbarrows, two the size of cottages, and the humps moved and swelled till they burst, and the crumbled earth poured out from them, and from each hump there came out an animal. The moles came out just like you might see a mole come out in England. The dogs came out, barking the moment their heads were free, and struggling as you'd see them do if they were getting through a narrow hole in a hedge. The stags were the queerest to watch, for of course the antlers came up a long time before the rest of them, so at first Diggory thought that they were trees. The frogs, who all came up near the river, went straight into it with a little plop plop and a loud croaking. The panthers, leopards, and things of all sorts sat down at once to wash the loose earth from their hindquarters, and then stood up against the trees to sharpen their front claws. Showers of birds came out of the trees. Butterflies fluttered. Bees got to work on the flowers as if they hadn't a second to lose. But the greatest moment of all was when the biggest hump broke like a small earthquake, and out came the sloping back, large wise head, and 4 baggy trousered legs of an elephant. And now you could hardly hear the song of the lion. There was so much cawing and cooing, crowing, braying, neighing, barking, lowing, bleating, and trumpeting. It was fun to read. But though Diggory could no longer hear the lion, he could see it. It was so big and so bright he could not take his eyes off it. The other animals did not appear to be afraid of it. Indeed, at that very moment, Diggory heard the sound of hooves from behind. A second later, the old cab horse trotted past him to join the other beasts. The air had apparently suited him as well as it had Uncle Andrew. He no longer looked like the poor old slave he'd been in London. He was picking up his feet and holding his head erect. And now, for the first time, the lion was quite silent. He was going to and fro among the animals, and every now and then he would go up to 2 of them, always 2 at a time, and touch their noses with his. He would touch 2 beavers among all the beavers, 2 leopards among all the leopards, 1 stag and 1 deer among all the deer, and leave the rest. Some sorts of animals he passed over altogether, but the pairs which he had touched instantly left their own kind and followed him. At last he stood still, and all the creatures whom he had touched came and stood in a wide circle around him. The others, whom he had not touched, began to wander away. Their noises faded gradually into the distance. The chosen beasts who remained were now utterly silent, all with their eyes fixed intently upon the lion. The cat-like ones gave an occasional twitch of the tail, but otherwise all were still. For the first time that day there was complete silence, except for the noise of running water. Diggory's heart beat wildly. He knew something very solemn was going to be done. He had not forgotten about his mother, but he knew jolly well that even for her he couldn't interrupt a thing like this. The lion, whose eyes never blinked, stared at the animals, as hard as if he was going to burn them up with his mere stare, and gradually a change came over them. The smaller ones, the rabbits, moles, and such like, grew a good deal larger. The very big ones, you noticed it most with the elephants, grew a little smaller. Many animals sat up on their hind legs, most of their heads on one side, as if they were trying very hard to understand. The lion opened his mouth, but no sound came from it. He was breathing out a long, warm breath. It seemed to sway all the beasts as the wind sways a line of trees. Far overhead, from beyond the veil of blue sky which hid them, the stars sang again, a pure, cold, difficult music. And then there came a swift flash like fire, but it burned nobody, either from the sky or from the lion himself. And every drop of blood tingled in the children's bodies, and the deepest, wildest voice they had ever heard was saying, "Narnia, Narnia, Narnia, awake! Love, think, speak! Be walking trees, be talking beasts, be divine waters." And that is the end of chapter 9. But I'm still going pretty strong, so we'll go on to chapter 10 tonight. Just give me a sec. Okay. Chapter 10. The First Joke and Other Matters. It was, of course, the lion's voice. The children had long felt sure that he could speak, yet it was a lovely and terrible shock when he did. Out of the trees wild people stepped forth. Gods, fauns, and satyrs, and dwarfs. Out of the river rose the river god with his naiad daughters, and all these and all the beasts and birds in their different voices, low or high or thick or clear, replied, "Hail Aslan, we hear and obey. We are awake, we love, we think, we speak, we know." "But please, we do not know very much yet," said a nosy and snorty kind of voice. And that really did make the children jump, for it was the cab horse who had spoken. "Good old Strawberry," said Polly. "I am glad he was one of the ones picked out to be a talking beast." And the cabby, who was now standing beside the children, said, "Strike me pink. I always did say that oss had a lot of sense, though." "Creatures, I give you yourselves," said the strong, happy voice of Aslan. "I give you forever this land of Narnia. I give you the woods, the fruits, the rivers. I give you the stars, and I give you myself. The dumb beasts who I have not chosen are yours also. Treat them gently and cherish them, but do not go back to their ways, lest you cease to be talking beasts. For out of them you were taken, and into them you can return. Do not so." "No, Aslan, we won't," said everyone. But one perky jackdaw added in a loud voice, "No fear," and everyone else had vanished just before he said it, so his words came out quite clear in a dead silence. And perhaps you have found out how awful that can be. Say, at a party, the jackdaw became so embarrassed that it hid its head under its wings, as if it were going to sleep, and all the other animals began making various queer noises, which are their way of laughing, and which, of course, no one has ever heard in our world. They tried at first to repress it, but Aslan said, "Laugh and fear not, creatures. Now that you are no longer dumb and witless, you need not always be grave, for jokes as well as justice come in with speech." So they all let themselves go, and there was such merriment that the jackdaw himself plucked up courage again, and perched on the cab horse's head, between its ears, clapping its wings, and said, "Aslan, Aslan, have I made the first joke? Will everyone always be told how I made the first joke?" "No, little friend, you have not made the first joke, you have been the first joke." Then everyone laughed more than ever, but the jackdaw didn't mind, and laughed just as loud, till the horse shook its head, and the jackdaw lost its balance and fell off, but remembered its wings, and they were still new to it, before it reached the ground. "And now," said Aslan, "Narnia is established. We must next take thought for keeping it safe. I will call some of you to my council. Come hither to me, you the chief dwarf, and you the river god, and you oak and the he-owl, and both the ravens and the bull-elephant. We must talk together, for though the world is not 5 hours old, an evil has already entered it." The creatures he had named came forward, and he turned away eastward with them. The others all began talking, saying things like, "What did he say entered the world? A Nevil? What's a Nevil?" "No, he didn't say Nevil, he said Weevil." "Well, what's that?" "Look here," said Diggory to Polly. "I've got to go after him. The lion. I must speak to him." "Do you think we can?" said Polly. "I wouldn't dare." "I've got to," said Diggory. "It's about Mother. If anyone could give me something that would do her good, it would be him." "I'll come along with you," said the cabby. "I liked the looks of him, and I don't reckon those other beasts will go for us, and I want a word with old Strawberry." So all three of them stepped out boldly, or as boldly as they could, toward the assembly of animals. The creatures were so busy talking to one another and making friends that they didn't notice the 3 humans until they were very close, nor did they hear Uncle Andrew, who was standing trembling in his buttoned boots a good way off and shouting, but by no means at the top of his voice. "Diggory, come back! Come back at once when you're told. I forbid you to go a step further." Well, at last they were right in among the animals, and the animals all stopped talking and stared at them. "Well," said the he-beaver at last, "what in the name of Aslan are these?" "Please," began Diggory in a rather breathless voice, when a rabbit said, "They're a kind of large lettuce, that's my belief." "No, we're not. Honestly, we're not," said Polly hastily. "We're not at all nice to eat." "There," said the mole, "they can talk. Who ever heard of a talking lettuce?" "Perhaps they're the second joke," suggested the jackdaw. A panther, which had been washing its face, stopped for a moment to say, "Well, if they are, they're nothing like so good as the first one. At least I don't see anything very funny about them." It yawned and went on with its wash. "Oh, please," said Diggory, "I'm in such a hurry. I want to see the lion." All this time the cabby had been trying to catch Strawberry's eye, and now he did. "Now, Strawberry, old boy," he said, "you know me. You ain't going to stand around here and say you don't know me." "What's the thing talking about, horse?" said several voices. "Well," said Strawberry very slowly, "I don't exactly know. I think most of us don't know much about anything yet. But I've a sort of idea I've seen a thing like this before. I feel as if I've lived somewhere else, or was something else, before Aslan woke us all up a few minutes ago. It's all very muddled, like a dream, but there were things like these trees in the dream." "What?" said the cabby. "Not know me? Me what used to bring you a hot mash of an evening when you were out of sorts? Me what rubbed you down proper? Me what never forgot to put your cloth on if you was standing in the cold? I wouldn't have thought it of you, Strawberry." "It does begin to come back," said the horse thoughtfully. "Yes, let me think now, let me think. Yes, you used to tie a horrid black thing behind me and hit me to make me run. However far I ran, this black thing would always come rattle-rattle behind me." "We had our living to earn, see," said the cabby. "Yours the same as mine. And if there hadn't been no work and no whip, there'd have been no stable, no hay, no mash, and no oats. For you did get a taste of oats when I could afford 'em, which no one can deny." "Oats?" said the horse, pricking up its ears. "Yes, I remember something about that. Yes, I remember more and more. You were always sitting up somewhere behind, and I was always running in front, pulling you and the black thing. I know I did all the work." "Summer, I grant you," said the cabby. "Hot work for you and cool seat for me. But what about winter, old boy, when you was keeping yourself warm and I was sitting up there with my feet like ice and my nose fair pinched off in the wind, and my hands that numb and I couldn't hardly hold the reins?" "It was a hard, cruel country," said Strawberry. "There was no grass, all hard stones." "Too true, mate, too true," said the cabby. "A hard world it was. I always did say those paving stones weren't fair on any hoss. That's London. That is London. London, that is. I didn't like it no more than what you did. You were a country horse, and I was a country man. I used to sing in the choir. I did, down at home, but there wasn't a living for me there." "Oh, please, please," said Diggory, "can we get on? The lion's getting further and further away, and I do want to speak with him so dreadfully badly." "Look here," said Strawberry. "This young gentleman has something on his mind that he wants to talk to the lion about. Him you call Aslan. Suppose you was to let him ride on your back, which he'd take it very kindly, and trot him over to where the lion is, and me and the little girl will be following along." "Ride?" said Strawberry. "Oh, I remember now. That means sitting on my back. I remember there used to be little ones of you two-leggers who used to do that long ago. He used to have little hard square lumps of some white stuff that he gave me. They tasted, oh, wonderful, sweeter than grass." "Ah, that'd be sugar," said the cabby. "Please, Strawberry," begged Diggory, do let me get up and take me to Aslan." "Well, I don't mind," said the horse. not for once, in a way. Up you get." "Good old Strawberry," said the cabby. "Here, young un, I'll give you a lift." Diggory was soon on Strawberry's back, and quite comfortable, for he had ridden bareback before on his own pony. "Now, do gee up, Strawberry." "You don't have to have a bit of that white stuff about you, I suppose?" said the horse. "No, I'm afraid I haven't," said Diggory. "Well, it can't be helped," said Strawberry, and off they went. At that moment a large bulldog, who'd been sniffing and staring very hard, said, "Look, isn't there another one of these weird creatures, over there beside the river under the trees?" Then all the animals looked and saw Uncle Andrew standing very still among the rhododendrons and hoping he wouldn't be noticed. "Come on," said several voices. "Let's go and find out." "Oh, hello there, Wildcard. Always good to have people on here. Hope you're enjoying." "Come on," said several voices. "Let's go and find out." So while Strawberry was briskly trotting away with Diggory in one direction, and Polly and the cabby were following on foot, most of the creatures rushed toward Uncle Andrew with roars and barks and grunts and various noises of cheerful interest. We must now go back a bit and explain what the whole scene had looked like from Uncle Andrew's point of view. It had not made it at all the same impression on him as on the cabby and the children, for what you see and hear depends a good deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. Ever since the animals had first appeared, Uncle Andrew had been shrinking further and further back into the thicket. He watched them very hard, of course, but he wasn't really interested in seeing what they were doing, only in seeing whether they were going to make a rush at him. Like the witch, he was dreadfully practical. He didn't notice that Aslan was choosing one pair of every kind of beast. All he saw, or thought he saw, was a lot of dangerous wild animals walking vaguely about, and he kept on wondering why the other animals didn't run away from the big lion. When the great moment came and the beast spoke, he missed the whole point, for a rather interesting reason. When the lion had first begun singing, long ago, it was still quite dark, and he had realized that the noise was a song. And he had disliked the song very much. It made him think and feel things he didn't want to think and feel. Then, when the sun rose, and he saw the singer was a lion, only a lion, he said to himself, he tried his hardest to make believe that it wasn't singing, and never had been singing, only roaring as any lion might in a zoo in our own world. Of course, it can't really have been singing. He thought, I must have imagined it. I've been letting my nerves get out of order. Who ever heard of a lion singing? And the longer and more beautifully the lion sang, the harder Uncle Andrew tried to make himself believe that he could hear nothing but roaring. Now, the trouble about trying to make yourself stupider is that you really are, is that you very often succeed. Uncle Andrew did. He soon didn't hear anything but roaring in Aslan's song. Soon he couldn't have heard anything, even if he had wanted to. And when at last the lion spoke and said, "Narnia, awake," he didn't hear any words. He heard only a snarl, and when the beast spoke in answer, he heard only barking, growling, baying, and howling. And when they laughed, well, you can imagine. That was worse for Uncle Andrew than anything that had happened yet. Such a horrid, bloodthirsty din of hungry and angry brutes he had never heard in his life. Then, to his utter rage and horror, he saw the other 3 humans actually walking out into the open to meet the animals. The fools, he said to himself. Now those brutes will eat the rings along with the children, and I'll never be able to get home again. What a selfish little boy that Diggory is. And the others are just as bad. If they want to throw their own lives away, that's their business. But what about me? They don't seem to think of that. Nobody thinks of me. Finally, when a whole crowd of animals came rushing toward him, he turned and ran for his life. And now anyone could see that the air of that young world was really doing the old gentleman good. In London he had been far too old to run. Now he ran at a speed which would have made him certain to win the 100 yards race at any prep school in England. His coat-tails flying out behind him were a fine sight. But of course it was no use. Many of the animals behind him were swift ones. It was the first run they had ever had in their lives, and they were all longing to use their new muscles. After him, they shouted. Perhaps he's that Neville. Tally-ho! Temptivy! Cut him off! Round him up! Keep it up! Hurrah! In a very few minutes, some of them got ahead of him. They lined up in a row and barred his way. Others hemmed him in from behind. Wherever he looked, he saw terrors: antlers of great elks and the huge face of an elephant towered over him. Heavy, serious-minded bears and boars grunted behind him. Cool-looking leopards and panthers with sarcastic faces, as he thought, stared at him and waved their tails. What struck him most of all was the number of open mouths. The animals had really opened their mouths to pant. He thought that they had opened their mouths to eat him. Uncle Andrew stood trembling and swaying this way and that. He had never liked animals at the best of times, being usually rather afraid of them, and of course years of doing cruel experiments on animals had made him hate and fear them more. "Now, sir," said the bulldog in a businesslike way, "are you an animal, vegetable, or mineral?" That was what it really said, but all Uncle Andrew heard was growl. And that is the end of chapter 10, which is where I will leave it. We'll continue on with chapter 11 and 12 tomorrow. That was fun. I'm sorry I missed those times last week. I missed you guys. But otherwise, I hope all of you have a good night. And take care of yourselves. See you tomorrow.